Hi, welcome back to another episode of Leadership Lenses, our podcast designed for principals, heads of school, and anyone else who wants to enhance and improve Jewish education. We are thrilled to have with us today Mark Shinar. Dr. Mark Shinar is a former head of school who has run schools in New York, in California, in Oakland, East Coast, West Coast, in between, and now works as a leadership consultant. The thing I love about having Mark on this show is that Mark and I both do very similar things. We've been friends and colleagues for more years than either of us probably wants to count. And our approaches, I find, are very complementary with an E, because we can also be very critical, but complementary with an E in the sense that we take interestingly slightly different approaches to things. So I always love talking through things with Mark to get his perspective, and hope that you will as well. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Barry. I appreciate it.
Excellent. So we're going to get right into it. Our theory here is that everybody listening doesn't have lots of time to spare. And I know that a lot of the work you do is about leaders and their leadership teams.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the key struggles, or one in specific, maybe you're working with a head of school and one of their principals or other leadership team members under them, who's a really senior leader in the school, is struggling, just isn't really doing the job in the way that you want to see it done. How do you approach situations like that? And feel free to take a step back and frame whatever you need to do to bring us into the picture.
Yeah, listen, I appreciate that, because the work is so hard and there's so many moving parts, and heads of school are getting input from so many different people. So determining whether or not a person is doing their job correctly, adequately, successfully can often be influenced by who picked up a phone that morning, right? And so it's hard, because everybody's so busy and working, to keep your finger on the pulse all the time of how the different members of your team are functioning. So you rely often on external information or validation. One minute you get a phone call to say, that principal's so great, amazing. And the next minute you get a phone call or a comment that says the person's not supporting me, or the person's not responding appropriately, or the person isn't doing what I want them to be doing, and therefore there's a problem. So a lot of the times problems surface because heads of school hear about them more than they see them. To me, there's no one right answer. Of course, the jobs are really complex and really hard, but I want to focus in on a couple of ideas, most of which should be very much, obvious in theory and difficult in practice. The obvious reality is success comes from more effective communication. Bottom line. There's the thesis. The more we communicate, the more we talk to one another, the more we're clear about what it is that we're hoping to see and what we're experiencing and happening, the more likely we'll be able to find ourselves on the same page, getting to a space where we can actually work together.
Absolutely agree. Pausing you there for a second, just to underline that.
Yeah. More
effective communication. Now, the tricky thing here, and I was at a conference this past week where I was working with heads of school and board chairs together. And I talked to them about whether they communicated effectively, and they all, shockingly said they did.
Yeah.
But then when I asked more specific questions about, hey, have you talked about how you'll share challenges? They're like, no, we didn't talk about that.
The greatest roadblock to communication, effective communication, is the illusion that there was communication.
You're quoting someone.
Yeah, and I don't remember who, but
I think that's George Bernard Shaw, but I'm not positive.
I think you're right. George Bernard Shaw said it. That's right. And it comes up in Teams That Work, in the book Teams That Work as well. Right. So it is clear that communication, we make certain assumptions about how clear we are about what it is that we want. We assume that the person on the other end of the table gets it, understands it, that we've closed the loop, that there's clarity, that if I disagree with a decision, that I've had the opportunity to share my disagreement, even though I might move forward with the decision made regardless. But communication happens so quickly or happens so ephemerally that we tend to assume that we've been very clear when the other person on the other side of the table, so to speak, doesn't.
Right. I almost feel like it would be disrespectful to the other person if we clarify more.
That's right. And we do it in the classroom all the time, right? We close, we
Yes.
dipstick and we check for understanding. And I say this to administrative teams all the time. We know how to check for understanding when it comes to kids. We talk to teachers often about making sure that there's understanding, but we assume that when we're talking to adults, that would come off as, God forbid, condescending or disconnected. And the truth of the matter is, we've learned that it doesn't. Great communication happens because we make it happen, not because we think it's happened. So we have to be extremely deliberate about the communication. You asked me before, how do we help an administrator who is not necessarily performing to task? Well, there are a lot of reasons why an administrator may not necessarily be performing up to par. Sometimes the goals may not be extremely clear what it is we're trying to accomplish. Sometimes, like I said, we're dealing with a lot of political realities that the administrator, him or herself, is not necessarily fully aware of. So the head of school is thinking about things from a holistic perspective, right? Going back to our Bowman and Deal work. They're thinking about structural things and they're thinking about human resource, but they're also dealing with a lot of politics. And here's something that I've interestingly found a lot of heads of school say to me is, I want to protect my team members. I don't want to clue them in. I don't want to loop them into negative feedback, or I don't want to loop them in to problems that I'm having because I want to protect them. So if the board is giving me a difficult time, I don't want to bring that to my administrative team. That's not their problem. Why burden them with that information? And I get why we would go in that direction. And perhaps my feedback around that is a little counterintuitive, but I think actually the opposite. I think being open, when we talk about vulnerability, it's not just a term. It really does mean coming to the team and saying, you're my people, right? And I am struggling right now, not because I don't know what the right answer is. I'm struggling right now because the work is hard and because I've got a board member that's pressing me, or I've got a parent issue that I can't quite figure out, and it's about you. And I don't know what to do about that. So let's talk, meaning then we go into our radical candor work where we say, listen, the best way to raise a person's ability to be better at the job is to talk about it and to explain what we want the end goal to look like. And I think that gets in the way for a lot of principals or heads of school. They don't particularly know, or they're not particularly clear, when do I share and when do I try to cover, cape and tights it, right? Superhero it and swoop in and save the day around the administrator, in which case the administrator slowly but surely gets cut out because the head of school becomes then the address. And it becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it gets cut out because the head of the school seat has been planted in his or her mind that this administrator is probably not so effective at X, Y, or Z, and I'm going to circumnavigate them.
So you've got two huge points here, and again, I just want to highlight both of them because there's a lot embedded in what you're saying. One point is about the head of school keeping things to themselves and saying, look, I am going to protect my team. I'll say for myself as the head of school, that was something I fell into for some time. I have a really difficult thing in the board. I've got pressure. And the thing I realized after about a year was like, my team knew there was something going on because they're not dumb. They didn't know exactly what because I didn't tell them. And if I had told them, look, I'm struggling with ABC on the board side, I'm managing it. It's on me. Like, that's my job to manage it. But you should be aware because it's part of the landscape in which you're working, and because we're a team, that would have been much more effective. I'm curious to pick apart more what you said in terms of the principle. Like, so yeah, I'm struggling with something and it's around you and I don't know what to do about it. Tell us more, like, how does that conversation go in a way that doesn't destroy the principle?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think if I were to take a step back, another thing I want to say is a challenge that I'm seeing with heads of school and principals, and I'll bring this all together based on your question in a second, but a real challenge that I'm seeing with heads of school and principals is a lack of joy in the work, a lack of laughter, not enough fun. It's a hard job. I've done it. You've done it. You said I was in California. I was in New York. I was also a head of school here in Israel. You can imagine the different cultural needs and demands of different locations where you're running schools. One of the things that I've always been very proud of is that my administrations have always been a place of serious laughter and joy. And I try very hard not to take everything too seriously, and not everything is a crisis or catastrophize things. Because there are going to be plenty of crises and catastrophes. But for the most part, we have to assume the majority of the issues that we're dealing with are manageable. We can do hard things and we can rise to the occasion and handle them. And if we do so with laughter and joy, a sort of bounce in our step, then I find a lot of those difficult conversations can actually happen with a little bit more laughter. I can imagine calling a principal in and saying, we have to deal with something and it's ridiculous, or we have to deal with something and I don't know how to deal with it, but let's just take a minute and laugh and try to figure out how to navigate this together. I remember my board president in California would come once a week. We had our regular weekly meetings. And she knew I liked I was on a Diet Coke fix at the time, so she would bring me lots of Diet Coke and Reese's peanut butter cups before schools were not free. And the people in the front office would say to me, "We never knew what was going on in there because there was so much laughter. Like, are you guys working?" We were working on some really serious things. The laughter had helped not just diffuse difficult issues, but it also helped to build a relationship that to this day, my board president in Oakland, who I haven't seen in 15, 20 years, I still speak to regularly. That's true with a lot of my colleagues over the course of the years, because it wasn't just about the work. It was about finding the joy within the work. And I want to say that and really underscore it, because I don't know that we're talking enough to our heads of school and to our principals, although I'm doing a lot of that in my coaching work around not what's the joy, like I love seeing kids learn, or I love it when a teacher has a successful moment. That is 100% true. Of course that's happening. That is joyful. I'm saying, where are we laughing? Where are we making fun? Where are we diffusing some of the tension through a silliness on a certain level? And the people that are on our direct team should be I would hope, our first line of defense, and almost become, in the ideal world, of course, friends. And being friends with people who we work with, especially at the senior leadership level, I think makes those difficult. I'm coming now back to your original question, makes those difficult conversations a whole lot more palatable because we're doing something together. It is hierarchical. Of course, when a head of school has to have a conversation. But I've had more than my fair share of conversations where I say, okay, this parent called me. This is what they're saying about you. What shall we do? What do you want me to do? How can I help you or not help you? Or should we just file this under idiotic conversation and move on? But I'm not coming in hand wringing. I'm coming in working with you, because we know that this job has so many moving parts and balls are going to get dropped right and left because we're human and people have different perspectives around what success looks like.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's figure it out together. And let's also make sure we're grounded in a space where we're not taking ourselves too seriously.
Right. So I love those 2 points. And, there's a lot of research that's been done around play at work. And as educators, again, we know, right? The work of childhood is play and the play of adulthood is work. Right. So if we could take it that way and actually enjoy the day to day rather than spend most of our days worrying about when the next thing's going to fall, then we'll be in much, much better shape. And I completely agree that is missing. And I'm actually going to take that piece of advice and try and put it into my work more, because I don't think I touch on it as much as you do. This is the complementary nature of our styles, and I appreciate that. That all works for me. And I love the breaking down. We're going to work through this together. We're co-understanding the problem. I'm not telling you the problem, and we're going to co-create the solution. That works up until the point that you might be firing the person, because then
there's a lot of delta. There's a lot of space between here and there, right? I have done my fair share of firing people. Never pleasant. Really, some of the hardest conversations, of course. I'll tell you, the best fire I ever had was when afterwards the person hugged me and said, "Thank you. I was never brave. I knew I was miserable. I knew it wasn't working here. It didn't feel good to come to work anymore. I didn't have the guts, quite honestly, to name that or to walk away from it, because who quits from a job, a high-powered job?" The process led us to a place where I was able to I've said to people across the desk from me, or when I'm firing, definitely not across the desk, but around the round table, they've said to me, I was able to say to them, "You're not happy. This cannot be working for you. Your best self is not surfacing. You are not thriving. You are not flourishing. We can continue to do this, and you will continue to be unhappy, and I will continue to have to be on top of that. And these conversations will continue to be really challenging and almost miserable for everybody. If we can get to a place where people understand that fit matters, it is not a statement of your self-worth. It is not a statement of your value. It is not necessarily even a statement of your talents and abilities. Sometimes it simply is a statement of fit, timing, right place, right time, etc. I'm not saying every fire skipped out of my office saying, oh my God, rainbows and puppies, and I cannot believe what an epiphany you've given me. I'm now going to become, I'm going to go trek the Himalayas. It doesn't often work that way. But if it's done respectfully, timely, transparently, it feels like it isn't coming out of nowhere. But it's after a process, and it's done with care, and a care that is simply, this is not where your best self is showing up every day. I have found that to be more effective.
So coming back to the point you raised about letting people go and that being done well, I completely get that. My question is, when I'm a head of school and I'm sitting with a principal, I would imagine that the principal wants to know, first and foremost, what kind of conversation is this? Is this we're having a tough time and we're going to work through it together, but it's going to be difficult conversation? Or is this okay, I might need to find a new job conversation? And so how should heads of school convey and be clear about that difference?
Well, you go back to that original opening of good communication is good communication, and actually naming it and saying what kind of conversation it is we're having. I don't fire people because we're having a difficult conversation, right? I look for patterns, right? So if I'm seeing somebody have a continuous pattern of ineffective conversations with lots of different parents, lots of different teachers, where they get up in front of a faculty and they're not prepared for the PD that they're supposed to be running over and over again. I'm sitting with them, I'm working with them, and we're still not getting anywhere. Then I'm now saying things to the effect of, we've done this before. Here we find ourselves here again. And I just want to say that it leaves me with questions. And now the next conversation is going to be, we really need to talk. And I said this a few minutes ago, we need to be timely. This is not a May, June conversation, unless, and I'll talk about a caveat experience I had, but ideally this is a November, December conversation. Very rarely will I encourage an administrator who's in his or her first year, to give up in November, December, or will I, encourage a head of school to dismiss someone who's doing this for only 1 year, even if it's really challenging and the work is not getting done to satisfactory levels. Because it does take some training and some time to get used to a new environment, new community. I think that's why you and I have work to do. We coach, we support, because we know this. If you want to be a great leader, you got to get a good coach, right? And we want people to be effective, and we want to give people opportunities to grow outside of the ecosystem of the school. That's why people like us can come in and also be helpful. Mostly, like I said, we're looking for patterns. A parent complains, an issue comes up. We generally use that as a data point, and that conversation, therefore, is very local to the data point. If we're seeing patterns, then we're calling someone in for a conversation that is not connected to a specific data point, but we're saying, listen, we've had many, many conversations about this behavior. It could be this parent, this teacher, this student, and it just keeps kind of coming up. We need to kind of figure out what's going on and see what comes next. I want administrators to be meeting regularly. I would like it that meetings not be just when there's a problem that needs to be solved. Very often, especially now in October, late October when we're doing this, I'll hear from administrators, I'll ask a question to the effect of, well, when's your next meeting with your head of school? Or when's your next meeting with the principal? Well, with the holidays, with this, that, and it's been such a difficult start of the school year, we haven't really gotten our meetings set up. And I hear that over and over again. I don't know if you constantly, right? And I say, whoa, time out. Those meetings are the critical. They're not just a something to do and we'll get around to it when things settle. Those meetings, whether they're full administration or individual one-on-one meetings, depending on how you do it, and both, are, in my mind, the first priorities. How many times have I seen people say to me, we're supposed to meet, but the schedule doesn't allow us. We haven't found this time where we can all get into a room together. And I say, whoa. before the person who's creating the schedule creates the schedule, they need to know there are certain parameters and constraints, one of which is the whole administration needs to have 2 hours a week. I'm making up the time where they're sitting and meeting. Those meetings are the work. That's the underscore. Those meetings are the work. They're not something we do around the work. And that goes back to communication, relationship building, laughter, joy, etc. I actually had an administrator tell me that teachers were somewhat upset when they would walk past an administration meeting and the office is all glass and they would see the administrators laughing. And because the assumption was, well, if they're laughing and having such a good time and I'm working like a dog out here, what are they laughing about? And so I do think that it is incumbent upon the heads of school to create a culture of laughter and joy. I come back to that because I don't want laughter to be a taboo, that somehow if we look like we're happy, we must not be working, or there must be, or something must be going wrong. Because they're happy, they're obviously ignoring the real situations going on in school. So conversation.
Right. And there's a few points in that I think are really worth noting. So number one, if you are a head of school and you're listening to this, and your next meeting with your principal is more than a week away, there's a problem.
Wake up to it. Yeah, like step up to it. That's right.
And if you were ever canceling those meetings because there's nothing on your agenda, that's a problem.
That's a red flag.
On your agenda, relationship building is on your agenda, and you actually do those things much better when there's not a burning issue. So the routine set meetings, I agree with you, those are the work. That's where the basis is. Like, imagine, right, you never talk to a friend of yours unless you're in a fight.
That's right.
But you don't have much of a friendship.
That's right. That's a lot of the work I'm doing with the administrative teams, is how we meet more effectively, coherently, and cohesively, to the point where those meetings, canceling those meetings would be somewhat concerning. So we meet on Thursday and of course we're canceling because it's Thanksgiving. Fine, no problem. But if something comes up and we have to cancel, that we would say, when are we rescheduling this meeting within the next 24 hours? Because there's work that has to be done. And that doesn't have to be done after school. It can be done during the school day because that is part of the work. And that itself is really important for me to underscore, is that we don't have to ask our administrators to stay from 4:30 to 6:30 or from 5 to 7 in order to have a normal meeting. Maybe once every 6-8 weeks we do that because we want to be a little bit more strategic and we want to brainstorm. But the rhythm of our meetings as part of our school days should be thoughtful and should feel extremely important, because that's where you're building the real work, the real relationships. And that's where people are learning from each other, brainstorming. Some of the work I do with administrative teams when I'm on a call with them is I'll say, think of something you've worked on in the last 2 weeks that you did not bring up to the administration. You worked on it because you had and you didn't bring it to the administration. Now, spend a minute brainstorming and write down in your notebook what that issue is, and why, make an argument why you could have brought that to the administration. And when they go around the room and say, well, I'm dealing with this thing, and another administrator says, I dealt with something very similarly, or I have that sibling in my division, or one of the most beautiful ones is I had an athletic director who sits on the administrative team say there was some kind of issue with the jerseys. Should I get like reversible jerseys, or should I just get kids wanted a jersey, but it wasn't reversible. I wasn't going to bring that to the school administration. I just had to make an issue, make a decision. And then they started talking. It was one of my meetings. They started talking about that. And he was curious, should I have brought that to the administration? And one of the other administrators said, it would have been a really cool conversation around whether or not we wanted to give the kids a win about choosing a jersey or not, or there was other policies. We could have talked about that. It didn't have to be a 4-hour conversation, but it could. We are all interconnected. And when we are interconnected, our thinking is just sharper and stronger. And we're a safety net for one another to allow for the more difficult conversations to have context and the more joyful moments to rise up to the surface. That's what we're looking for.
And I love the way you're putting that, because I also, similarly, dealing with heads of school who meet with their teams, one of the things that we're always trying to avoid is the update-itis, where we sit for 2 hours in a meeting and each person shares a 20-minute update on all the things that they want everyone else to know.
Avoid it.
That's not what meetings are for. That's right. But I can have a surface issue, the reversal, and I've actually dealt with the reversible jersey issue multiple times.
Right. So you know what I'm talking about.
I'm like, oh my God, I hate the reversible jerseys.
Right. What a great opportunity to talk about something, to laugh about something, right?
And to dig down to the values that are beneath it.
100%. And it's counterintuitive, right, for administrators, because everybody's working and there's just a lot of things to do. And I don't want to bother other people. And that goes back to the protective mode that I was talking about earlier in the podcast. I don't want to bother people with my stuff. Like if I have something that requires a lot of people's input, I'll ask them for sure. But people actually aren't trained to think in terms of team. They're trained to think in terms of silos. And what do I have to do? And how do I have to do it? And a head of school does the same thing. Right. And as such, there's sometimes a missing distributive leadership gene that makes the head of school feel like I have to handle it, or I'll delegate it fully. But if I'm not either very involved or not involved at all,
what do we
it's
do?
a waste of time, or what are we doing here?
Right. And one cute little strategy that I've used to guide heads and principals to deal with that in their meetings is if Mark has the reversible jersey issue, I'm going to ask, Lisa to interview Mark about that. And that's how we're going to build up. Our agenda is all going to be kind of these back and forth. So yeah, Mark's got an issue he wants to raise, but it's not going to be Mark giving an update. It's going to be Lisa saying, so Mark, like, why is this an issue, right? What's important about this? Why is it bothering you? And that lets us dig deeper. And then again, like the play stuff, for those who aren't ready for what Mark was talking about before, like laughter, joy. Okay, well, we encourage you to get to that. But if you think about it in terms of play and learning, that's a pathway towards it. Because now, like, we're talking about values. Yep. And we're going to laugh at the fact that, like, a reversible jersey became the biggest deal. But it actually got down to the real meat of how much control and leadership we give to kids versus our financial efficiency because we're buying one jersey versus two versus accessibility for everyone. All these pieces come up in real life.
Or the league team rules, and are we following those rules or are we not? And what are the consequences of that? There's so many, the concept is not, can I think about what we would talk about once we're in that conversation, but do I even think about it proactively that I would want to put this on the administrative agenda? And when we talk about shared agenda, I still have too many times where a head of school is sending out the night before a meeting, don't forget, if you have anything on the agenda, please make sure to put something on the agenda. And everyone's like, all right, if I put something on the agenda and it's useless, does that make me look bad? If I don't put something on the agenda because I can't think of anything, does that make me look bad? Am I being assessed based on how well I use the agenda? And actually, I think that agenda is a critical tool for keeping notes, for healthy communication, for remembering what we decided, who owns what, when, etc. But I also think that agenda is space where people, if they're really thinking about it, would use it as their holding ground for any issues that come up over the course of the week. I kept my agenda open on the phone when I was a head of school, when I was a principal. It was an important tool for me. I got to talk to the team about this. I'm going to put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
And that is
good head pull it out of every individual conversation also.
That's right.
I'm talking to the principal, hey, let's put this on the agenda. The way I like to frame it for heads sometimes, and again, anyone who's familiar with early childhood education will often be familiar with the term of provocation within learning, right? We attempt to do things in the classroom that are going to stimulate learning. In my mind, a lot of the agenda items are actually learning provocations.
That would be
the jersey. So like, I'm not judging you. This is not show and tell of like, show me how amazing you are. And everybody comes into the agenda. It's show me something you're struggling with so that we can learn and work on it together.
That's right. That's right. And together is actually how we're going to work on it. That is our strategy. Like when I was running a general studies program, I had all kinds of questions about whether or not I wanted to do APs this way or that way or at all. I could have theoretically made unilateral decisions about that. The Judaic studies principal could have said, do what you want. I don't really have a specific agenda around that. But really what we drill down to is most questions are about the culture of the school. They're not really about the questions themselves, but they have implications to larger culture and how we run an operation together. And if we can frame things through the terms of what's the culture of our school, what's the value system, a jerseys question, a disciplinary issue, a financial issue, a board problem, a nasty parent in a WhatsApp group, Any of those can be, there's a problem, how do we solve it? Or do we have a culture issue that we want to talk about? And I tend to think in terms of symbolism and culture. And I like to know how we're thinking about things. And I'd like people to walk out of the room thinking about things similarly, or at least asking the similar questions. So if someone comes up in an early childhood and says, I've got a parent that's really giving us a hard time in a WhatsApp group, I want the middle school principal to weigh in on that. I want to talk about what we think about parents in WhatsApp groups, not simply how do we solve that early childhood issue.
Right. And so the challenge for the head is take these pieces and don't address them just technically. Address them as symbols of culture, as little examples, samples of culture, and get into it. And so we're just about done for our session, but I just want to highlight a few key points, and this has been really fun for me. So you've accomplished
That's what we're going for. Fun.
Exactly. But I want to highlight a few points, and then Mark, you can add if I missed anything. Number one, fun, joy, laughter. You are not in education because life sucks, right? And if you went into education and now your life sucks, then you're probably not going to do a great job of inspiring parents, children, and teachers around you. And so being a martyr might be this negative tendency we get into, but it's much better for everyone around us if we can do our best to find the joy in the laughter. We do that by playing together, and we do that by building the foundation of communication. And even if you assume or think or maybe feel silly saying something explicitly, say it, as they will always be happy that you did. We don't check for understanding in a classroom by saying, please raise your hand if you missed that.
That's right.
We check for understanding by saying, here's what we're talking about. Who can say it back to me? Who can write it on their whiteboard? And we need to do the same thing in communication. If we put all those together and we see the arena of the admin meeting as a time for building and digging into culture, then we can create that foundation which flows throughout the work.
I think you summarized beautifully.
There
Perfect.
you go.
Good
that
listen.
was your check for understanding.
That was excellent. I agree with everything I've said. And I really do love this work. I really do. I love it. I loved being a head of school. I loved working with my board of directors. I loved working with teachers, with kids, with parents. And that doesn't mean I didn't have very painful, difficult, angry, challenging moments. Of course I did, because the work is the work, but I loved the work. And I had a teacher once that said to me, you know what, Mark, what I see about you, the teacher, and this was, going to the head of school, you say yes a lot. And I said, that's nice. That's interesting. Tell me more about what you mean. She said, I've never felt so safe to try things or to be, to have an idea and run with it, because you come in and your general stance is, yes, why not? Let's try it. Worst case scenario is we don't like it and we backpedal it. Obviously, if something is detrimental or counterintuitive or counterproductive to the institution, or it doesn't meet the goals of the mission or the vision of the institution, fine. Of course, we're going to say, I need to challenge that. We need to stop. We need to think. But for the most part, if your stance is, yeah, let's give that a try. Why not? It becomes such I think, a refreshing way to give people the autonomy to be successful, to experiment, to feel more comfortable. We didn't talk about psychological safety, but we always talk about psychological safety. And what does it mean to take risks and feel comfortable? It's not just a slogan, feel comfortable to fail forward. It's not just a slogan. It comes because we create environments where those behaviors are welcome. So say yes. Give it a try. Let people spread their wings and be super successful. The more successful your team is, obviously, the better it is for you. And create the groundwork for people to feel the joy in the building. That's, I think, how we build teams.
I love it. I love that note for ending. So I'm just going to plug right now. If you are in your work and you're not feeling joy, and you're struggling with that teamwork and you're struggling with the laughter, you should call Mark. You can find him on his website, markshinar.com.
www.markshinar.com.
Okay, and we'll put that link in the show notes so you can click on it there if you want. Mark is an amazing resource for you to find that joy. So if you're not feeling it, Mark talks about authentic leadership. You've seen it here. He brings his whole self into the work. And I really, I can't recommend strongly enough that if you're looking for some of that kind of support, or if you're just not feeling the joy, reach out to Mark. Mark, I don't know if he has any slots open, but I know that it's worth reaching out, and he will take the time to talk to you. I'm putting him out on that. Take the time to talk to you regardless, and you would really benefit and grow and enjoy working with him on any of these pieces. And Mark, it's been a pleasure. We always end this podcast. I literally end it by saying, try it out. So I love that you ended with that, and I'm going to say it again, right? Take these ideas that Mark shared, reach out to Mark for more ideas, reach out to me for more ideas, but try them out and let us know how it goes. So you can reach Mark again at markshinar.com. You can reach me on LinkedIn at Barry Kislowitz, on our Substack Leadership Lenses, or on our website, kislowitzconsulting.com. Have a wonderful day and happy leading.